The barrels stood in perfect rows in the Union Garrison's storehouse, each one branded with the eagle and shield of the United States Army. 12 oak casks of Kentucky whiskey, shipped down from Louisville to keep the occupying soldiers of Galveston warm through the Texas winter of 1863. But on the morning of February 14th, when Sergeant Patrick O'Malley drew the first rations for his men, the amber liquid that poured into his tin cup carried more than alcohol. It carried vengeance distilled from grief, measured in careful doses by hands that had learned precision through years of forced service. Anna Beauregard had been those hands. The enslaved woman who scrubbed their floors and served their meals had also become their executioner. Within 6 hours, 17 soldiers would be writhing in agony. Within 12 hours, 8 would be dead. The garrison would explode into chaos, and Anna would vanish into the maze of Galveston's back alleys, leaving behind only whispers of what one woman could accomplish when pushed beyond the breaking point of human endurance. Salt spray and cannon smoke drifted across Galveston Bay as the USS Harriet Lane dropped anchor on October 1st, 1862. The Confederate stronghold had fallen without a shot. Union forces under General Nathaniel Banks swept ashore, their boots crunching on oyster shells and sand as they claimed the most important port in Texas for the federal cause. Anna Beauregard watched from the kitchen window of the Merchant's Hotel as blue uniforms filled the streets. She was 31 years old, with calloused hands and eyes that had learned to reveal nothing. For 15 years, she had belonged to Colonel Marcus Beauregard, who owned the hotel and 300 acres of cotton land outside the city. When the Yankees came, Beauregard fled inland with his family, leaving behind his property and 47 human beings he considered equally disposable. The Union Army commandeered the hotel as their headquarters. Anna found herself cooking for the same officers who had bombarded her city, scrubbing floors for men who spoke of liberation while keeping her in chains. The irony tasted bitter as salt water. "You'll serve breakfast at 6 sharp," Captain James Hollister informed her that first morning, his Massachusetts accent clipping each word. "Coffee, eggs, whatever bacon we can requisition. These men have been at sea for weeks." Anna nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. She had learned long ago that survival meant becoming invisible, a pair of hands that performed tasks without thought or feeling. But behind her downcast eyes, she was cataloging everything. The number of soldiers, their routines, their weaknesses. The garrison settled into occupation like barnacles on a ship's hull. 53 men took up residence in the hotel's 28 rooms. They posted guards at the harbor, established patrol routes through the city, and began the work of turning Galveston into a federal stronghold. Anna served their meals, washed their uniforms, and listened to their conversations. "General Banks says we'll ship the contraband north within the month," she overheard Captain Hollister telling his lieutenant. "New Orleans has contacts who'll take them off our hands. Field labor in Louisiana, dock work in Memphis. Better than leaving them here to cause trouble." Contraband. The word struck Anna like a physical blow. The federal term for escaped or captured slaves, as if human beings were cargo to be counted and shipped. She had thought the Yankees meant freedom when they spoke of ending slavery. Instead, they meant a different kind of bondage. That night, Anna lay on her thin mattress in the hotel's basement and thought of her husband, Samuel. He had been sold away 3 years earlier when Colonel Beauregard needed quick cash for gambling debts. She never learned where he went or what became of him. Now she understood the pattern would simply repeat under new masters with different accents. Something cold and sharp crystallized in her chest. The Yankees had not come to liberate anyone. They had come to redistribute human property according to their own needs. If that was the case, Anna decided, she would give them exactly what they deserved. February brought unseasonable cold to Galveston, and with it, a supply ship from New Orleans loaded with winter provisions. Anna watched from the hotel's loading dock as soldiers rolled 12 barrels of whiskey into the basement storage room. "Good Kentucky bourbon," Captain Hollister announced, a reward for the men's faithful service to the Union cause. The sight of those barrels triggered a memory Anna had tried to bury for 3 years. Samuel, standing in their small cabin behind the hotel, holding a bottle of the Colonel's stolen whiskey up to the lamplight. "Look how it catches the flame," he had whispered, his voice full of wonder. Samuel had been fascinated by small, beautiful things. The way morning light struck dewdrops, how music carried across water at sunset. It was one of the qualities that had drawn Anna to him, his ability to find grace in a world designed to crush it. That same bottle had been his downfall. Colonel Beauregard discovered the theft and accused Samuel of corrupting the other slaves with drink. The punishment was public and final. Anna had been forced to watch as they dragged her husband to the oak tree behind the hotel and strung him up while the colonel cited biblical passages about the wages of sin. "Let this be a lesson," Beauregard had proclaimed to the assembled slaves. "Theft is theft, whether the thief be white or black. Justice sees no color." But Anna had learned that justice was the luxury of those with power. The colonel never faced consequences for the whiskey he drank to excess every evening, or for the slave women he forced to his bed, or for the children he sold away from their mothers. Justice belonged to white men who could define its terms. Now, 3 years later, Anna found herself staring at 12 barrels of whiskey guarded by men who spoke of freedom while planning to sell her people like cattle. The parallel was too perfect to ignore. Samuel's ghost seemed to whisper from those wooden staves, urging her toward a reckoning that had been postponed too long. She began planning that very night. In the basement storage room, she studied the barrel's construction, noting the gaps between staves where liquid might seep out, the markings that indicated which end was which. The lock on the storage room was substantial, but not insurmountable. Anna had learned to pick locks out of necessity, food stores that were locked away, medicine cabinets that might contain remedies for sick children in the quarters. More importantly, she began studying the soldiers' drinking habits. Captain Hollister favored a glass before dinner. Lieutenant Morrison preferred his whiskey neat after the evening meal. Sergeant O'Malley was known to sample the stores while on duty, checking quality, he claimed. They treated the whiskey like a sacrament, a connection to the civilized world they had left behind in their northern cities. Anna smiled for the first time in months. If they wanted to worship at the altar of strong drink, she would gladly serve as their priestess. The Merchants Hotel had served wealthy planters and cotton factors before the war, men who demanded the finest foods and most elaborate preparations. Colonel Beauregard had required Anna to learn French cooking techniques, herb combinations, and the subtle art of flavoring that could transform simple ingredients into culinary masterpieces. She had also learned which plants could heal and which could harm. "Oleander makes a fine ornamental shrub," the colonel's wife had once told her while they toured the hotel's garden. "But never let the children chew the leaves. Pretty as they are, they'll stop a heart faster than any bullet." Mrs. Beauregard had intended the comment as casual conversation, the kind of botanical trivia wealthy women shared at garden parties. But Anna filed the information away with dozens of other facts about the natural world that surrounded them. Castor beans, beautiful and deadly. Foxglove, lovely in flower arrangements, fatal in teas, pokeweed berries, appealing to children, poisonous in quantity. Galveston's climate supported an abundance of toxic plants, many of them growing wild in the lots between buildings or cultivated in decorative gardens throughout the city. Anna had been gathering herbs for cooking since the Yankees arrived, and no one questioned her daily walks through the neighborhood. She was just another slave woman collecting greens for the kitchen, invisible in her routine. The castor bean plants behind the abandoned Sinclair mansion had grown tall and thick during the months since the family fled. Anna harvested the mottled seeds carefully, wearing gloves she had taken from Mrs. Beauregard's abandoned wardrobe. She knew the beans contained ricin, a poison that had no antidote and could kill in small doses. More importantly, it was tasteless and could be dissolved in alcohol without detection. Processing the beans required patience and precision. Anna worked in the hotel's kitchen during the early morning hours, before the soldiers woke for breakfast. She ground the seeds with a mortar and pestle, then boiled the resulting powder to extract the toxic compounds. The process filled the kitchen with an acrid smell that she disguised by cooking onions and garlic at the same time. "You're certainly industrious," Captain Hollister observed one morning, finding Anna already at work when he came down for coffee. "What has you up so early?" "Bread rises better in the cool air," Anna replied, not looking up from her work. Colonel Beauregard always insisted on fresh loaves for breakfast. Hollister nodded approvingly. "Good. We appreciate dedication to duty. Carry on." The extract yielded a clear, odorless liquid that could be mixed into any beverage without detection. Anna tested small amounts on rats she caught in the hotel's basement, calibrating dosages until she found the right concentration. Too little, and the soldiers would merely fall sick. Too much, and they would die so quickly that the source of poisoning would be obvious. She wanted them to suffer first. She wanted them to understand that their pain had an author, that their deaths were not accidents, but justice delivered by invisible hands. Most importantly, she wanted time for word to spread through their ranks, to create fear and confusion that would paralyze their operations. Anna prepared enough poison to contaminate all 12 barrels, calculating that each soldier who drank the whiskey would receive a fatal dose over the course of an evening's consumption. She stored the liquid in a collection of small bottles, hidden beneath loose floorboards in her basement room. Everything was ready. She needed only the right moment to act. That moment came on February 13th, when Anna overheard Captain Hollister dictating a letter to Lieutenant Morrison. To General Banks, New Orleans. The contraband situation in Galveston requires immediate attention. Request transport for 47 individuals to be shipped north at earliest convenience. Current accommodations inadequate for extended detention. 47. The exact number of enslaved people Colonel Beauregard had left behind. Anna and everyone she had lived and worked with for years were about to be loaded onto ships like bales of cotton, sold to whoever would pay the best price for their labor. She had run out of time for planning. General Nathaniel Banks maintained his headquarters in a requisitioned mansion on New Orleans' Royal Street, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across maps of occupied Louisiana. The letters that crossed his desk that winter of 1863 dealt with mundane matters of military administration, troop rotations, supply requisitions, casualty reports. But one category of correspondence required particular delicacy: the business of human cargo. March 4th, 1863, confidential memorandum. Read the document Anna would never see, filed in Banks's private papers. Contraband disposition proceeds according to established protocols. Memphis contacts report strong demand for field hands. Louisville mills require additional workers. Current inventory: Galveston 47, Port Arthur 23, Beaumont 16. Inventory: the word reduced people to ledger entries, mathematical problems to be solved through efficient distribution. Banks had inherited this system from his predecessors, men who discovered that ending slavery did not eliminate the need for cheap labor. It simply required new methods of procurement and transport. The network stretched from Texas ports to northern factories, from Louisiana sugar fields to Tennessee ironworks. Ship captains who asked no questions about their human cargo. Labor contractors who paid premium prices for workers guaranteed not to flee. Federal officials who provided the legal framework that made it all appear legitimate. Captain Edmund Hollister understood his role in this machinery without requiring explicit orders. When the transport ship Meridian arrived in Galveston Bay on February 15th, Hollister had his human cargo ready for loading. 47 people who would be listed as voluntary laborers in the ship's manifest, though none had volunteered for anything except survival. "Line them up by the dock," Hollister instructed Sergeant O'Malley. "Men first, then women, then children. Captain Morrison wants them counted twice before they board." Anna stood with the others in the gray dawn light, listening to the waves lap against the pier. The transport ship rode low in the water, its hold already crowded with human cargo collected from other Texas ports. She could see faces pressed against the small windows, men and women torn from families, children separated from parents, all of them heading toward unknown forms of bondage in distant cities. But something was wrong with the scene. Sergeant O'Malley moved sluggishly, stopping twice to vomit over the dock's edge. Lieutenant Morrison clutched his stomach and grimaced with each step. 3 privates had failed to report for morning formation, too sick to leave their beds. Anna watched their distress with satisfaction. The previous evening's whiskey rations had done their work exactly as planned. The poison was moving through their systems, attacking their nervous systems with methodical precision. Some would recover after days of agony. Others would not recover at all. "What's wrong with them boys?" asked Isaiah, an elderly man who had worked the hotel's garden for 20 years. He stood next to Anna in the line, his voice barely audible. "Nothing that don't serve them right," Anna whispered back. The loading process descended into chaos as more soldiers succumbed to the poison's effects. Captain Hollister collapsed while directing operations, his face gray with pain. The ship's captain, a gruff New Englander named Morrison, grew increasingly agitated as he watched the Union forces dissolve into disorder. "I'm not waiting for your boys to recover," Morrison announced. "I've got schedules to keep and cargo to deliver. Load these people now or explain to General Banks why his cotton hands are still sitting on this dock." But with half the garrison incapacitated, the operation fell apart. Soldiers abandoned their posts to seek medical attention. The remaining officers lacked the manpower to control 47 people who sensed weakness and opportunity. Some of the enslaved began to slip away in the confusion, disappearing into Galveston's maze of backstreets and abandoned buildings. Anna was among those who vanished. She walked away from the dock as casually as if she were returning to the hotel kitchen, then turned down a side street and never looked back. Behind her, she could hear Captain Morrison's angry shouts and the sounds of soldiers vomiting in the morning sun. Galveston's free black community had survived by understanding the spaces between legal categories. They were neither enslaved nor fully free, existing in a precarious middle ground that required constant navigation. When Anna appeared at the door of Ezra Clemens's barbershop on Market Street, she found a network that had been preparing for moments like this since the occupation began. "You the one poisoned them soldiers?" Ezra asked without preamble. He was a small, precise man who had purchased his freedom 20 years earlier and built a legitimate business serving both white and black customers. His shop served as an informal communication hub for the community. "I might be," Anna replied carefully. "Good." Ezra's smile was sharp as a razor. "About time somebody showed them Yankees what Texas hospitality really looks like." The barbershop's back room housed more than hair tonics and straight razors. Maps covered one wall, showing safe houses and escape routes throughout southeast Texas. Coded messages arrived daily through a network of stevedores, washerwomen, and street vendors who moved information faster than any telegraph. Ezra had been tracking the Union Army's contraband operations since they began, documenting which ships carried human cargo and where they delivered their passengers. "They've been shipping folks north for months," Ezra explained, unrolling a map marked with red pins. "Houston, Beaumont, Port Arthur, anywhere they can find people to steal, calling it liberation while they sell bodies like they was bales of cotton." Anna studied the map, noting the scale of the operation. Dozens of communities, hundreds of people, all flowing through a network designed to provide northern industries with workers who had no choice in their employment. The Yankees had simply modernized slavery, giving it legal legitimacy and geographic distance. "Where do the ships take them?" she asked. "Memphis mostly, some to Louisville. Heard tell of folks ending up in Chicago, working in them slaughterhouses for wages that don't even pay for food and shelter. Free in name only." The room fell silent as both of them contemplated the implications. Anna had struck a blow against the system, but it was a small victory in a much larger war. The transport ship would return with different soldiers, and the machinery of human trafficking would continue. "What you did won't stop them," Ezra said finally. "But it'll make them think twice. Word's already spreading through the quarters. Anna of Galveston poisoned the whole garrison. Folks are starting to believe they can fight back." Anna nodded, understanding the weight of what she had become. Not just a person anymore, but a symbol. Stories would grow around her actions, transforming a desperate act of vengeance into something larger and more dangerous to the established order. "I need to get inland," she said. "They'll be looking for me once them soldiers start dying." "Already arranged," Ezra replied. "Cart leaves at midnight, heading for the Brazos Bottom. From there you can make your way north or west, depending on your preferences. Mexico's only a few weeks' travel if you know the paths." As if summoned by their conversation, footsteps echoed in the alley behind the shop. Ezra moved quickly to the window, peering through the blinds at the narrow space between buildings. "Blue uniforms," he whispered. "3 of them, moving this way." Anna felt her heart accelerate, but her voice remained steady. "Back door?" "Leads to the cemetery. You know the way from there?" She nodded. Galveston's municipal cemetery was a maze of ornate tombs and weathered headstones. Easy to navigate if you knew the paths. Impossible to search effectively with a small force. Anna had walked those grounds many times, visiting the unmarked section where enslaved people were buried without ceremony or recognition. "Tell me something," she said as footsteps approached the shop's front door. "Was it worth it? What I did?" Ezra's expression was serious, weighing the question with the gravity it deserved. "Ask me in a year," he said finally, "when we see what grows from the seeds you planted." Dr. William Thatcher had served as a Union Army surgeon through Bull Run, Antietam, and Shiloh, but he had never encountered anything like the medical crisis that engulfed the Galveston Garrison on February 14th. By noon, 23 soldiers were experiencing severe abdominal pain, vomiting, and neurological symptoms that defied conventional diagnosis. "It started with the whiskey rations last night," Captain Hollister managed to explain between waves of nausea. "O'Malley drew from the new barrels around 6 o'clock. Most of the men had their usual evening drink." Thatcher examined the symptoms methodically, noting the progression from digestive distress to more serious complications. Muscle weakness, difficulty swallowing, partial paralysis. The pattern suggested poisoning, but identifying the specific toxin required investigation beyond his medical training. "Secure those barrels immediately," he ordered Lieutenant Morrison, who was among the few soldiers still capable of carrying out commands. "Nobody drinks anything from the basement stores until we determine what we're dealing with." The lieutenant stumbled downstairs, returning minutes later with his face pale. "Sir, there's evidence of tampering. Several barrels show signs of having been opened and resealed, and there's a chemical smell I can't identify." Thatcher descended to the storage room himself, finding exactly what Morrison had described. Tiny holes drilled near the bottom of each barrel, so small they were barely visible unless you knew where to look. The holes had been plugged with wooden dowels and sealed with wax, but traces of foreign material clung to the wood. The doctor's medical bag contained basic field testing supplies, enough to confirm his suspicions. He drew samples from 3 different barrels, testing each for common poisons. The results were conclusive. All 12 barrels had been contaminated with ricin, a toxin derived from castor beans. "Dear God," he whispered, understanding the implications immediately. Ricin had no antidote. Treatment was purely supportive, aimed at managing symptoms while the body either survived or succumbed to the poison's effects. The soldiers who had consumed the contaminated whiskey would live or die based on their individual constitution and the amount they had drunk. Private James McCord, a 19-year-old farm boy from Ohio, died first. He had sampled several rations while on guard duty, consuming enough ricin to overwhelm his system within hours. Thatcher could only watch as the young man's breathing became labored, then stopped entirely. Sergeant Patrick O'Malley followed 2 hours later, his body racked with convulsions that no medication could control. The tough Irish immigrant who had survived street fights in Boston and Confederate bullets at Fredericksburg was defeated by invisible poison administered by invisible hands. "Who had access to the storage room?" Captain Hollister demanded during a brief moment of lucidity. "Someone did this deliberately. This is an act of war." Thatcher kept his thoughts to himself, but he suspected the truth was more personal than warfare. In his experience, poisoning was an intimate crime, requiring knowledge of the victim's habits and access to their food and drink. Someone who served them daily, who understood their routines, who had reason to hate them enough to commit mass murder. The hotel's enslaved staff had vanished during the morning's chaos, taking advantage of the Garrison's incapacitation to disappear into the city. But one name kept appearing in the soldiers' fevered recollections. Anna, the woman who cooked their meals and served their drinks, who had access to every corner of their daily lives. "Find her," Hollister whispered as Thatcher checked his pulse. "Find Anna. She did this. She killed my men." But Anna was already beyond their reach, moving through a network that understood the value of protecting someone who had struck such a blow against their oppressors. The soldiers could search every building in Galveston without finding her, because the entire black community had become her accomplices in escape. Dr. William Thatcher's investigation into the poisoning led him beyond the confines of military medicine into areas where science intersected with human cruelty. As more soldiers succumbed to the ricин's effects, he found himself documenting not just their deaths, but the systematic brutality that had provoked Anna's revenge. In Captain Hollister's quarters, Thatcher discovered a collection of correspondence that painted a disturbing picture of the Garrison's true purpose in Galveston. Letters from General Banks outlined the contraband procurement program in clinical detail. Manifests from transport ships listed human cargo alongside military supplies. Financial records showed payments received from Northern labor contractors for services rendered. February 10, 1863. Captain Hollister to General Banks, read one particularly damning document. Contraband inventory ready for shipment. 47 prime specimens, including skilled craftsmen and house servants. Several females suitable for domestic work. Estimated value per head $250, New Orleans market. Thatcher felt sick reading the correspondence, and not from any medical condition. He had joined the Union Army believing he was fighting to end slavery, not to create new forms of human trafficking. The revelation that his own government was complicit in selling people like livestock challenged everything he thought he knew about the war's moral purpose. In the hotel's basement, he found evidence of Anna's makeshift laboratory. Traces of castor bean residue clung to a mortar and pestle hidden behind loose boards. Small bottles that had contained the extracted ricin were buried in a crate of old linens. The setup showed careful planning and considerable knowledge of chemistry. Anna had not acted impulsively, but had executed a methodical plan of assassination. More disturbing was the diary Thatcher discovered in Anna's abandoned room. Written in a careful, educated hand, it documented years of abuse under Colonel Beauregard's ownership and the growing desperation as she realized the Union Army intended to perpetuate her bondage under different management. "They speak of freedom while they count us like cattle," one entry read. "The blue uniforms change nothing except the color of our chains. Samuel died for stealing a bottle of whiskey. How many bottles will I steal before his death is answered?" The diary's final entry, dated February 12th, was chillingly prophetic. "Tomorrow they will taste what they have earned. Let them drink deeply of the harvest they have sown." Thatcher closed the diary with trembling hands. Anna had not committed random acts of violence. She had delivered precise justice for specific crimes. The ricin in the whiskey barrels was her verdict on men who had betrayed every principle they claimed to represent. But understanding Anna's motives did not ease the doctor's medical responsibilities. 8 soldiers were dead, 6 more were dying, and several others would suffer permanent neurological damage from the poison's effects. As their physician, Thatcher was bound to preserve life regardless of his personal feelings about the victim's character. "Doctor, you need to see this," Lieutenant Morrison called from the storage room. Despite his own illness, Morrison had continued investigating the crime scene, driven by military discipline and personal outrage. Thatcher descended to find Morrison examining the whiskey barrels with a magnifying glass borrowed from Captain Hollister's personal effects. Under magnification, the tiny holes drilled into each barrel revealed evidence of extraordinary precision. "Look at the angles," Morrison said, his voice hoarse from vomiting. "Each hole is positioned to maximize poison distribution while minimizing detection. The dowel plugs are carved to exact specifications. This wasn't amateur work. Whoever did this had engineering knowledge." The observation added another layer to Anna's story. She had not simply learned to cook and clean during her years of enslavement. She had educated herself in mathematics, chemistry, and mechanical principles that enabled her to plan and execute a complex assassination. Her intelligence had been as invisible to her owners as her rage, dismissed and ignored, until it became a weapon they could not defend against. "We need to expand the search," Morrison continued. "Question everyone who might have helped her. Check every safe house, every underground network. Someone with these skills doesn't work alone." Thatcher nodded agreement, but privately he doubted they would find Anna or her accomplices. The black community had closed ranks around her with the efficiency of a military operation, protecting someone they saw as a freedom fighter rather than a murderer. In their eyes, Anna had done what the Union Army had promised, but failed to deliver. She had struck a blow against the system that treated human beings as property. Reverend Josiah Washington had led the African Methodist Episcopal congregation in Galveston for 12 years, shepherding his flock through the uncertainties of slavery, war, and occupation. When Union forces seized the city, he had cautiously welcomed their arrival, hoping the federal presence might bring meaningful freedom to his community. The events of February 14th forced him to confront how naive that hope had been. "Brothers and sisters," he addressed the 53 people crowded into the small wooden church on Sunday morning. "We face a test of our faith and our judgment. The actions of one among us have brought consequences for all." Everyone knew what he meant. Anna's poisoning of the Garrison had sent shockwaves through Galveston's entire black community. Federal soldiers were conducting house-to-house searches, questioning anyone who might have information about her whereabouts. Several families had been detained for interrogation, and rumors circulated that General Banks was considering collective punishment for the community's refusal to cooperate. "What would you have us do, Reverend?" asked Mary Osley, a washerwoman who had known Anna for years. "Turn her over to them Yankees so they can hang her for giving them what they deserved?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. Despite the danger Anna's actions had brought upon them, most people supported what she had done. The Garrison's plan to ship them north like cargo had been an open secret. Everyone knew their freedom was an illusion that could be revoked whenever it served federal interests. "I ain't saying what she did was wrong," Washington replied carefully. "Lord knows them soldiers earned whatever they got. But we got to think about what comes next. They'll keep pushing until somebody breaks, and when that happens, we all pay the price." The Reverend's concerns were pragmatic as well as moral. Union forces controlled the city's food supplies, job opportunities, and legal protections. If the black community was perceived as harboring a mass murderer, those resources could be withdrawn at any time. Collective punishment was a tool the powerful had always used against the powerless. But another voice rose from the congregation: Ezra Clemens, the barber who had helped Anna escape. His words carried weight because everyone knew he had the most to lose from continued resistance. His shop served white customers as well as black, and his business could be destroyed by accusations of disloyalty. "Reverend Washington speaks wisdom," Ezra said, rising to address the group. "But sometimes wisdom ain't enough. Sometimes you got to choose between being safe and being right." He paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected years of careful accommodation to white authority. "Anna of Galveston didn't ask our permission before she acted. She saw wrong being done and she stopped it the only way she could. Now the question is whether we got the courage to stand with her, or whether we going to let fear make us into their accomplices." The debate that followed revealed deep divisions within the community. Older members, who had survived by avoiding confrontation, urged caution and cooperation with federal authorities. Younger voices demanded solidarity with Anna, arguing that her actions represented a new kind of resistance that could not be ignored. "What would you do?" Ezra asked the congregation, using words that would be remembered long after the meeting ended. If you was Anna, watching them Yankees load your people onto ships like they was bales of cotton, what would you do? Pray for deliverance or deliver justice yourself? The question hung in the air like incense, forcing everyone to confront their own capacity for resistance and revenge. Some would answer with continued accommodation, seeking safety through submission. Others would choose the dangerous path of active defiance, accepting the risks that came with fighting back against seemingly overwhelming power. In the end, the congregation reached a consensus that satisfied no one completely, but protected everyone partially. They would not actively help federal authorities find Anna, but they would not obstruct legitimate investigations either. Individual members could make their own choices about how much cooperation to provide, based on their personal circumstances and moral convictions. It was a compromise born of necessity rather than principle, but it achieved its purpose. The community's loose unity held together through the weeks of searching that followed, protecting Anna's escape route while avoiding collective punishment. Federal authorities found fragments of information, but never enough to track her movements or identify her accomplices. The congregation sang "Go Down Moses" as the service ended, their voices carrying beyond the church walls into streets patrolled by soldiers who were learning that occupation was more complicated than conquest. The spiritual's familiar words took on new meaning in the context of Anna's actions. Sometimes deliverance required human agents willing to confront Pharaoh's army with more than prayers and patience. Major Thomas Blackwood arrived in Galveston on February 22nd with credentials from the War Department and a reputation for solving problems that confounded local commanders. A former Pinkerton detective who had joined the Union Army at the war's outbreak, Blackwood specialized in tracking fugitives who disappeared into hostile communities. His methods were thorough, systematic, and often brutal. 17 soldiers dead, Garrison effectiveness compromised, local population in open defiance, he summarized after reviewing Captain Hollister's reports. This Anna person has accomplished more damage than a Confederate regiment. Finding her is now a matter of federal security. Blackwood established his headquarters in the Merchants Hotel's former ballroom, transforming the elegant space into an investigation center, complete with maps, witness statements, and evidence samples. He approached Anna's case like a military campaign, analyzing her methods, mapping her support network, and predicting her likely escape routes. His first breakthrough came from examining the poisoning itself. The precision required to contaminate 12 barrels without detection suggested someone with specialized knowledge, not simply a house servant acting on impulse. Blackwood requisitioned Anna's complete service record from Colonel Beauregard's estate papers, finding details that painted a different picture than the Garrison had assumed. Subject received extensive education in domestic sciences, including food preparation, herb cultivation, and household chemistry, one document noted. Demonstrated exceptional aptitude for mathematical calculations related to recipe scaling and ingredient proportions. Colonel Beauregard frequently remarked on her intellectual capabilities. Armed with this intelligence, Blackwood began reconstructing Anna's movements during the days leading up to the poisoning. He interviewed every surviving soldier who had interacted with her, mapping her access to the storage areas and timing her opportunities to tamper with the whiskey barrels. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of preparation that stretched back weeks. Anna had been collecting materials, testing formulations, and establishing alibis with the patience of a professional assassin. Her apparent compliance and invisibility had been carefully constructed camouflage for methodical planning. She didn't snap under pressure, Blackwood reported to General Banks via telegram. This was premeditated murder executed with military precision. Subject represents ongoing threat to federal operations throughout occupied territories. Blackwood's search extended beyond Galveston into the network of safe houses, churches, and businesses that comprised the Underground Railroad's Texas operation. He arrested 12 people on suspicion of aiding Anna's escape, holding them in military custody without formal charges. The detentions sent a clear message that protecting Anna would carry severe consequences. But the community's resistance proved more sophisticated than Blackwood had anticipated. Information flowed through channels he could not penetrate. Warnings reached potential targets before his soldiers arrived, and witnesses developed convenient memory lapses when questioned under oath. Anna remained one step ahead of his investigation, protected by people who understood that her capture would endanger them all. February 26, 1863. Confidential report. Blackwood wrote to his superiors. Subject has vanished into support network with operational security exceeding most military units. Recommend expanding investigation to include martial law declaration and suspension of habeas corpus for all suspected collaborators. The recommendation reflected Blackwood's growing frustration with conventional law enforcement methods. Anna was not simply a fugitive criminal. She had become the focal point for organized resistance to federal authority. Capturing her would require tactics typically reserved for enemy combatants rather than civilian criminals. The strain of protecting Anna while maintaining their own safety finally broke the community's unity in early March. Blackwood's aggressive tactics had created an atmosphere of suspicion and fear that poisoned relationships built over decades of mutual support. The first crack appeared when Solomon Carter, a dock worker with 6 children, was arrested for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Federal soldiers ransacked his home, questioned his family, and threatened to send him north on the next labor transport unless he provided information about Anna's whereabouts. Faced with losing everything, Carter broke. "I know who helped her," he told Blackwood during his final interrogation. "Ezra Clemens, the barber on Market Street. He's got maps, safe house locations, the whole network. But I ain't saying nothing more unless you guarantee my family's safety." Blackwood accepted the bargain without hesitation. Carter's information led to a dawn raid on Clemens's barbershop that netted a treasure trove of intelligence about the Underground Railroad's operations. Maps marked with escape routes, coded messages from contacts throughout Texas, financial records showing payments to conductors who moved fugitives toward Mexico. But Ezra Clemens had vanished hours before the raid. Warned by someone within Carter's own family who could not bear to see the barber betrayed. The empty shop contained evidence but no prisoners, frustrating Blackwood's plans to roll up the entire network through forced confessions. Word of Carter's betrayal spread through the community like a fever, creating divisions that ran deeper than fear. Families that had supported each other through slavery and war suddenly viewed their neighbors with suspicion. Churches split as congregants debated whether Carter had been a traitor or simply a father trying to protect his children. "He made his choice," Mary Osley declared at a tense gathering in Reverend Washington's church. "Same choice we all got to make: stand together or fall apart." But others defended Carter's decision, arguing that abstract principles meant nothing when your children faced starvation or forced labor. The moral clarity that had initially united the community behind Anna began to fragment under the pressure of Blackwood's investigation. March 8, 1863, intelligence summary, Blackwood reported to General Banks. Local network showing signs of fracture under sustained pressure. Multiple arrests have produced cooperative witnesses. Recommend maintaining current operations until complete organizational collapse achieved. The Major's strategy was working exactly as planned. By targeting the community's most vulnerable members, He was forcing impossible choices that turned neighbors against neighbors. Each betrayal weakened the network's ability to protect Anna while providing new leads for his investigation. But Anna herself remained beyond his reach, moving through a constantly shifting maze of safe houses and false identities. Reports placed her in Houston one day, near the Mexican border the next, always one step ahead of federal patrols. Some accounts described her as traveling alone. Others mentioned companions who might have been fellow fugitives or Underground Railroad conductors. The truth was simpler and more troubling for Blackwood's investigation. Anna had become multiple people in the community's collective imagination, a symbol that could not be captured because it existed in stories rather than physical reality. Every woman who helped a neighbor escape detection, every act of resistance against federal authority was attributed to Anna of Galveston. By mid-March, Anna's legend had outgrown the facts of her case in ways that confounded Major Blackwood's systematic investigation. Reports of her activities arrived from towns hundreds of miles apart, describing simultaneous appearances that defied physical possibility. She was poisoning Confederate supplies in Houston, sabotaging Union equipment in Beaumont, and leading escaped slaves toward Mexico through the Rio Grande Valley. "The woman has become a myth," Dr. Thatcher observed during one of his regular meetings with Blackwood. "People are seeing her everywhere because they need to believe she still exists, still fighting back." Thatcher had remained in Galveston to document the long-term effects of ricin poisoning on the surviving soldiers, but his medical work had given him unique insights into the psychological impact of Anna's actions. The garrison lived in constant fear of further attacks, checking their food and drink with paranoid intensity. Some soldiers had stopped eating meals prepared by local cooks, preferring military rations despite their monotony. "Fear is her most effective weapon now," Thatcher continued. "Every Union soldier in Texas knows that someone like Anna might be working in their kitchen, serving their meals, watching for opportunities. The uncertainty is more damaging than actual attacks." Blackwood understood the observation, but refused to accept its implications. In his experience, myths could be destroyed by capturing their human origins. If Anna was dead or imprisoned, the stories would eventually fade, replaced by new concerns and different heroes. His investigation had identified 3 women who might have been the real Anna, each matching physical descriptions provided by surviving soldiers. One had died in federal custody while being transported to Louisiana. Another had disappeared near the Mexican border, and the third had been spotted in Arkansas heading north toward Kansas. March 15, 1863, Field Report, Blackwood wrote to his superiors. Multiple credible sightings suggest subject remains active in various locations throughout occupied territories. Recommend coordination with regional commands to establish comprehensive tracking network. But even as he pursued these leads, Blackwood began to suspect that the identity of the real Anna mattered less than the idea she represented. The poisoning of the Galveston garrison had demonstrated that enslaved and formerly enslaved people possessed both the knowledge and determination to strike back against their oppressors. That revelation could not be erased by capturing any single individual. The major's suspicions were confirmed when a new poisoning incident occurred in Corpus Christi, 200 miles south of Galveston. 3 Union soldiers died after drinking contaminated water from barrels that had been tampered with, using methods identical to Anna's techniques. Local investigations found no trace of the perpetrator, but witnesses reported seeing a woman matching Anna's description near the army camp days before the attack. "She's teaching others," Blackwood realized with growing alarm. The techniques, the methods, maybe even the specific poison formulations. Anna of Galveston isn't just one person anymore. She's a template for resistance. The implications transformed his mission from manhunt to counterinsurgency. If Anna's methods were spreading throughout the occupied territories, every Union garrison faced potential attack from within their own support staff. The war's dynamics were shifting in ways that military planners had never anticipated. Federal authorities responded with increasingly harsh measures designed to prevent further incidents. Enslaved and freed people were banned from handling food or drink destined for military consumption. Background investigations were required for all civilian employees at Army installations. Collective punishment policies threatened entire communities for any attacks against federal forces. But these measures only reinforced the growing perception that Union liberation was indistinguishable from Confederate oppression. The blue uniforms might speak different words, but the underlying assumptions about racial hierarchy remained unchanged. Anna's poison had exposed contradictions that military force could not resolve. The transport ship Meridian returned to Galveston Bay on March 20th, its hold filled with human cargo bound for northern labor markets. Captain Morrison had recovered from his bout with Anna's poison, and federal authorities were determined to demonstrate that her actions had not disrupted their operations. 43 people would be loaded onto the ship, replacing those who had escaped during the February chaos. Anna watched from the shadows of a collapsed warehouse as soldiers herded families toward the dock. She had returned to Galveston despite the dangers, drawn by reports that federal forces were resuming their contraband shipments. The sight of children being separated from parents, husbands torn from wives, filled her with a familiar rage that time had not diminished. But something had changed since her escape from the city. The network that had protected her was fractured, its members scattered or imprisoned. Ezra Clemens was hiding somewhere in the bayou country south of Houston. Solomon Carter had been relocated to New Orleans under federal protection. Reverend Washington continued preaching, but his congregation had dwindled as families fled Galveston rather than risk further persecution. Anna carried a small cloth bag containing enough ricin to poison another dozen barrels, but the opportunity to use it might not arise. Security around federal operations had tightened considerably since February. Guards checked every person who approached military installations, and food supplies were kept under constant surveillance. More importantly, Anna was no longer certain that poison was the answer to the larger problem she faced. Killing soldiers provided temporary satisfaction, but did not address the systematic machinery that treated human beings as disposable commodities. New soldiers would replace the dead ones. New ships would carry away new victims, and the cycle would continue indefinitely. March 20th, 1863. Personal correspondence, she wrote in a letter that would be found years later in the ruins of a burned cabin. The poison worked exactly as planned, but the sickness goes deeper than any cure I can brew. They will keep coming, ship after ship, until we find a way to sink the whole fleet. The letter revealed a strategic mind, grappling with questions that extended far beyond individual acts of vengeance. Anna had begun to understand that her true enemy was not specific soldiers or officers, but the economic and political systems that created demand for their services. Poisoning whiskey barrels was guerrilla tactics, but winning the war would require different weapons. As darkness fell over Galveston Bay, Anna made her way to the cemetery, where enslaved people had been buried without markers or recognition. She knelt beside a fresh mound of earth that might have covered her husband Samuel's grave, though records of his burial had never been kept. The conversation she held with his memory that night would remain private, but its consequences would echo through Texas history for generations. When Anna rose from her knees, She had made a decision that would transform her from fugitive assassin into something far more dangerous. A teacher who could pass her knowledge to others willing to use it. The poison in her cloth bag would find its way into other hands, along with detailed instructions for its preparation and deployment. Anna of Galveston would become a curriculum rather than a person, a set of techniques that could not be captured or killed. The Meridian sailed from Galveston on March 21st, with its cargo of stolen lives intact. But other ships would not be so fortunate, as Anna's students began applying lessons learned from their teacher's example. The poisoning of the Garrison had been just the beginning of a campaign that would make Union occupation of Texas far more costly than military planners had anticipated. 3 months after the Galveston Garrison poisoning, similar incidents began occurring throughout occupied Texas with disturbing frequency. Union commanders from Houston to Brownsville reported cases of food and water contamination that followed Anna's methods with precision that suggested formal instruction rather than coincidence. April 28, 1863, Regional Intelligence Report. Major Blackwood compiled for his superiors. 17 separate poisoning incidents confirmed across departmental boundaries. Methods consistent with Galveston techniques. Evidence suggests coordinated training program rather than random copycat attacks. The pattern was unmistakable. Small doses of ricin administered through contaminated beverages, always targeting military personnel, always executed with timing that maximized chaos and minimized detection. Each incident left behind the same signature, tiny holes drilled into barrels or containers, sealed with precision that indicated mechanical knowledge, positioned to ensure even distribution of poison throughout the liquid contents. But Anna herself remained a ghost, reported in multiple locations simultaneously, described by witnesses whose accounts varied in every detail, except the intensity of her purpose. Some saw her as a tall woman with graying hair, others as young and slight, still others as middle-aged with distinctive scars. The inconsistencies suggested that Anna had become a role played by different people rather than a single individual. Dr. Thatcher, still documenting the medical consequences of ricin exposure, had developed his own theory about Anna's transformation. She's created something that transcends individual identity, he explained to Blackwood during one of their regular consultations. The techniques can be taught, the knowledge passed down, the motivation shared among people who face similar circumstances. Evidence for this interpretation emerged when federal forces raided a cabin near the Brazos River and discovered what appeared to be a training manual written in Anna's distinctive handwriting. The document contained detailed instructions for extracting ricin from castor beans, calculating dosages based on body weight and consumption patterns, and delivering poison through various food and beverage vectors. Chapter 3, Calculating Lethal Concentrations, read one section that made Blackwood's blood run cold. 1 ounce of extract sufficient for contaminating 12 gallons of spirits, assuming average consumption of 4 ounces per subject. Effects manifest within 6 hours. Death follows within 12 to 24 hours, depending on individual constitution. The manual was not simply a collection of technical information. It was a systematic curriculum designed to transform ordinary people into effective assassins. Sections covered surveillance techniques, security protocols, escape planning, and target selection. Most disturbing of all, it included a philosophical framework that justified mass murder as legitimate resistance to systematic oppression. The question is not whether they deserve death, Anna had written in the manual's introduction, but whether we deserve freedom. Every soldier who enforces bondage, every officer who ships our people north, Every official who treats human beings as property, all have chosen their fate through their actions. We simply deliver what they have earned. Federal authorities attempted to suppress circulation of the manual by offering substantial rewards for copies and threatening severe punishment for anyone found possessing it. But the knowledge had already spread too widely to contain. Versions appeared in slave quarters throughout the South, sometimes copied by hand, sometimes memorized and transmitted orally through networks that predated the war. Union military commanders found themselves facing an unprecedented challenge. Traditional counterinsurgency tactics were designed to combat organized military forces, not individual operators working within civilian populations. Anna's students could not be defeated through conventional battles because they did not form armies or hold territory. They simply existed within communities that had every reason to protect them. May 15, 1863, Departmental Directive. General Banks issued to all subordinate commands. Effective immediately, all military installations will implement enhanced security protocols for food and beverage handling. Local civilian employees subject to extensive background investigation and continuous surveillance. Any incidents of poisoning will result in collective punishment for surrounding communities. The directive acknowledged what military leadership preferred not to state explicitly. Anna of Galveston had achieved something no Confederate general had managed. She had made Union occupation significantly more expensive and complicated, forcing federal forces to divert resources from military operations to defensive measures against their own support staff. By summer of 1863, Anna of Galveston had become something that transcended the facts of her original case. Stories circulated through slave quarters and free black communities throughout the South, each telling slightly different versions of her poisoning of the federal garrison, her escape from Major Blackwood's investigation, and her continued activities as teacher and avenger. Some accounts described her as a conjure woman who had learned the secrets of root work from African traditions preserved through generations of bondage. Others portrayed her as an educated woman who had used chemistry and mathematics to transform domestic knowledge into weapons of war. Still others claimed she had been trained by abolitionists who taught her both the technical and philosophical foundations for systematic resistance. The variations in these stories reflected different communities' needs and understanding, but they shared common elements that revealed Anna's enduring significance. She was always described as someone who had lost everything to the machinery of human bondage: husband, children, freedom, hope, before finding a way to strike back that was both devastating and precise. Her poison became a metaphor for justice delivered through invisible hands. The Anna stories serve multiple functions, Reverend Washington observed in a letter to colleagues in other cities. They provide hope to people who see no other path to freedom. They offer practical knowledge to those willing to use it, and they remind our oppressors that their power rests on foundations that can be poisoned from within. Federal authorities understood the story's subversive potential and attempted to counter them with official narratives that portrayed Anna as a deranged criminal whose actions had brought suffering to her own community. Military chaplains were instructed to preach sermons about the sinfulness of revenge and the importance of accepting legitimate authority. Newspapers in occupied territories published editorials condemning the glorification of mass murder. But these efforts to control the narrative failed because they could not address the underlying conditions that made Anna's story resonate so powerfully. As long as Union forces continued operating contraband shipment programs, as long as people were bought and sold like livestock, as long as freedom remained a theoretical concept divorced from practical reality, Anna's example would continue inspiring others to follow her path. The poisoning incidents gradually decreased through late 1863 and early 1864, Not because Anna's influence was waning, but because federal authorities had made the necessary operational changes to protect themselves. Military installations established independent food supplies. Background investigations eliminated most potential threats from civilian employees, and enhanced security protocols made contamination extremely difficult. Anna had achieved her strategic objectives without winning complete victory. The contraband shipment program continued operating, but at much higher cost and reduced efficiency. Union forces remained in control of Texas, but required significant resources for internal security that might otherwise have been used for military operations. Most importantly, the psychological impact of her actions had permanently altered the relationship between federal forces and the communities they claimed to liberate. The last confirmed sighting of Anna of Galveston occurred in November of 1864, when a woman matching her description was seen boarding a ship in Galveston Bay bound for Mexico. Witnesses reported that she carried a small cloth bag and spoke briefly with the captain in Spanish before disappearing into the vessel's passenger cabin. No records exist of her arrival in Mexican ports, and subsequent investigations found no trace of her activities south of the Rio Grande. Whether she found the freedom she sought in exile, whether she continued her work among other communities of refugees and fugitives, or whether she simply chose to vanish from history remains unknown. What is certain is that her techniques outlived her physical presence. Poisoning incidents consistent with her methods occurred sporadically throughout the remainder of the war, always targeting military or civilian officials who participated in the systematic exploitation of black labor. The knowledge she had codified in her training manual spread through underground networks, ensuring that her tactical innovations would survive even if their creator did not. Major Thomas Blackwood never closed his file on the Anna case, continuing to track suspected associates and copycat incidents until his death from yellow fever in 1867. His final report, filed just weeks before his death, concluded that Anna of Galveston represented a new category of threat that traditional law enforcement was poorly equipped to address. The individual actor backed by community support and armed with specialized knowledge. Dr. William Thatcher returned to his home state of Massachusetts after the war, carrying with him detailed medical records of ricin poisoning that would later contribute to toxicology research. He never spoke publicly about the Anna case, but his private correspondence reveals a man haunted by the moral complexities of treating soldiers who had been poisoned by someone he increasingly viewed as a freedom fighter rather than a criminal. The Merchants Hotel in Galveston remained a federal facility until 1865, when it was returned to civilian control following the war's end. Local residents reported that the basement storage area where Anna had prepared her poison was never again used for food or beverage storage. The space was eventually sealed and forgotten, though some claimed they could still detect a faint chemical odor when the wind blew from that direction. The cemetery where Anna had knelt beside her husband's unmarked grave became a gathering place for annual commemorations that began informally in the 1870s and continued well into the 20th century. Visitors would leave small bottles of water and whiskey, not as offerings to the dead, but as reminders of what one woman had accomplished when driven beyond the limits of endurance. Today, Anna of Galveston exists primarily in oral tradition and academic footnotes. Her story preserved by communities that understand the difference between history and justice. Tourist guides in modern Galveston rarely mention her name, preferring to focus on more comfortable narratives of Civil War heroism and Reconstruction progress. But in certain neighborhoods, among certain families, the stories persist, passed down through generations that remember when freedom was not a guarantee, but a goal worth dying to achieve. Some say that on February 14th each year, When the wind blows just right across Galveston Bay, you can still smell the faint odor of castor beans and hear the echo of poisoned whiskey being poured into eager cups. A reminder that even the most powerful systems contain within them the seeds of their own destruction, waiting for the right hands to cultivate them into weapons. Subscribe if you want the next deep dive.